In the pantheon of US cities, Washington, D.C. is a real oddball. In some ways, it's the most American. It's the seat of the federal government and a place that absolutely will not let you forget what country you're in, but in other ways, the least American, not just because it's the only city in the continental US with zero congressional representation, but also it's got a built environment and an angular street grid that, in places, feels positively European. Also, some things here are just flat out different. We're going to get into all of that and all the reasons why this is just a really fun city to visit, including great neighborhoods and an iconic and incredibly useful metro system with slick connections to the airport and the train station. Yeah, there's a lot to get into, and let's start with an area that, for me, is kind of emblematic of DC, and we'll work our way outwards from there. The DuPont Circle neighborhood, generally very walkable, diverse mix of land uses, lots of restaurants and retail, and some institutional uses. The full range of housing types you'll find in the city, from incredibly charming federal and Victorian row houses to more modern high density multifamily, sometimes competing for the exact same space. Extremely multimodal with a metro station right at the circle, and I will get into more detail on the metro and Capital Bike Share later in the video. I want to talk about the actual circle itself, which is an artifact of the L'Enfant Plan of 1791, and it sits at the intersection of where two grid streets, 19th and P, and three diagonal streets, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire, come together. That makes it a 10-legged intersection, which probably seemed cool in 1791, but post-automobile era, probably not your local traffic engineer's preferred design choice. But part of what makes it work is that the through traffic on the heaviest street, Connecticut Avenue, is grade separated, running beneath DuPont Circle. It's a design idea that you'll see at several of the circles in DC, and it creates its own issues as far as the pedestrian friendliness of Connecticut Avenue itself in this case. But the city has made some fixes over time, and at time of taping, construction is underway to dramatically improve the street environment in and around the circle. And I do want to highlight the circle itself. Calling it a traffic circle is a bit of a misnomer. It's very accessible. I'd actually only ever been here in the dead of winter when I was here for Transportation Research Board annual meetings, which for whatever reason have to be in early January, so I never saw it with this level of activity before. I was actually staying in a hotel right on the circle, so I passed through several times. The mornings are a pretty chill scene, but then you come through on a Friday night and, well, impromptu dance parties aren't really my thing, but I was kind of into it. I often think about what are the indicator species of what I'd call good urbanism, and this probably qualifies. Okay, I want to give you some variety here and share some locations I really like, and there are a lot. So let's go to the next neighborhood to the north, Adams Morgan. Very walkable, centered on 18th Street, which has a bit of a different feel from just about any other main street in the city. It's got a bit of a bohemian vibe, but also something you can't help noticing as you explore the city. Just an incredible amount of diversity in the restaurant scene. DC has amazing immigrant communities and has for a long time, and the whole city benefits in a ton of ways, not the least your taste buds. A little more central, the 14th Street corridor. This is abnormal for me, but I got recognized like 3 times in 20 minutes just walking here Saturday night. So I guess it's my scene. Probably just about everybody's scene, to be honest. Georgetown, out to the west. Not super convenient to the metro, but very convenient by bike. Lots of great middle housing, very cool architectural styles. Probably DC's most infamously charming neighborhood, but man, I gotta say, the main commercial streets, Wisconsin and M, the sidewalk widths are just not sufficient for the amount of pedestrian traffic. Honestly, a great problem to have, but my possibly unpopular opinion is narrow sidewalks like this may be historic, but they are not charming, and a bit of right-of-way reallocation would go a long way here. Here's a location I'd actually never been to before, Eastern Market. Impromptu jazzercise in a public plaza next to the metro station, check. It probably helps that I filmed this over a weekend and the weather was spectacular, but this neighborhood was absolutely hopping. Street market going on 7th, but check out the actual Eastern Market building. Not the largest public market in the US, but kind of a vibe. I find myself wishing that a lot more urban neighborhoods in the US had an amenity like this. As far as the Saturday market out on the street, every city does have stuff like this, but I actually ran into multiple on this trip, just hopping from neighborhood to neighborhood. This includes just outside the Navy Yard Nationals Ballpark metro station when I was just minding my own business trying to check out the stadium district, and it was a complete dogfest. Also, back up at DuPont Circle, complete madness. I know there's an uncharitable way to look at this and say it's gentrification and it's a boutique experience for people who have far too much time and money on their hands, but I just don't buy it. Weekend street markets are not only an indicator species of a thriving city, they're really urbanist in the truest sense of the word. It's nearly impossible to get this density of independent vendors and neighbors out shopping and people watching if you're not in a vibrant city. Before we visit more neighborhoods, let's talk a bit about Capital Bike Share. I didn't come here intending to use it a lot, but number one, it's very economical. You're gonna spend 10 bucks a day max. It's super easy to use. If you have a Lyft app, you can just use the QR codes on the bikes to unlock. And my experience was, for a lot of trips, bike share is faster than taking transit. Part of this is DC is a dense city, and a lot of stuff you want to get to is a 10 or 15-minute bike ride, but also really some of the better bike infrastructure you're going to find in the US. It's not always complete, but there were very few streets I didn't feel comfortable biking on, so I never had much trouble finding a route that worked. Also, grab a bike, if only for the Metropolitan Branch Trail that runs parallel to a rail alignment going north out of Union Station. This feels a bit like the Beltline in Atlanta in terms of how much new housing density and mixed-use development have cropped up along the trail. But unlike the Beltline, it has operating high-capacity transit running parallel. I actually shot way more footage than I was expecting. It doesn't really fit the narrative flow of this video, but I put it up on my Patreon last week as bonus urbanist ASMR content if you're interested. Let's talk a bit more about housing. DC has a ton of middle density in pretty much every inner neighborhood, and it's nowhere near enough to meet the existing demand. But there are spots where you'll see newer high-density residential. A few months ago, I made a video on the densest places in America, and I pointed out that this census tract along U Street is the densest in the city, and I always love actually visiting and documenting places I've only seen in Street View. It's kind of a surreal experience. But here are a couple locations where you'll find newer infill. Navy Yard around the Nationals ballpark. Now, some of this has kind of a corporate feel to it, but I think that's another way of saying it's new development that just hasn't worn in yet. You guys, established middle density colonial charm doesn't come cheap, and this city needs housing units. You also get the Anacostia riverfront here, which I think they've done a nice job with. Attractive urban design elements, incorporates some historic structures, it's clearly popular. Didn't get to a Nats game, unfortunately, but pretty solid urban ballpark. Also, it was recommended to me multiple times that I go to the wharf down near the tidal basin, specifically to trash the whole development as a generic eyesore. I just think it's kind of telling that the places DC people hate would probably be considered good urbanism in most other US cities. And on the same theme, Union Market and the surrounding Noma area. I am not a local and I have no special insight on this, but this is where I got the most sense of the tension between new development that's needed to address basic supply and demand imbalance and legacy land uses that are still in operation. Because yes, Union Market is the name of a modern food hall with all the gentrification baggage that comes with that. But Union Market is also the name of an existing collection of wholesalers a block away, so you can also feel the tension just in the street design. Is Union Market a highly walkable adult playground with all the usual indicator species? Yes. Is Union Market a district with chaotic loading zones and on-street parking configurations from the 1950s? Also, yes, so a truly fascinating spot. Amazingly, I've gotten this far into a DC video without talking about one of the very best parts, the metro. I'm not going to try to give you an exhaustive history here. There are plenty of videos and books out there that are going to do much more justice to that than I ever could. But consider that the first line opened in 1976, similar vintage to systems like BART in the Bay Area and MARTA in Atlanta. That's how far behind our country is, and at the time, it was considered a likely boondoggle. It was planned and developed near the height of the freeway building era, and there was a lot of talk that this would all turn into a huge white elephant. Well, we're 50 years on, the metro serves over 500,000 rides a day. It's the second busiest heavy rail system in the US, way behind the New York City subway, but comfortably ahead of the third place Chicago L. And that's because the utility is there. 6-minute headways on a Sunday is to die for in just about any US city. And as far as the design, it would be criminally negligent to not say it. It is absolutely a brutalist masterpiece, and that is not a matter of opinion. I actually have more on the metro in a second because I have not talked about the connection to National Airport, which I think is a huge part of what makes this a great city to visit if you're someone who loves cities. I think metrophiliac is the word I'm looking for. I did not do a public event in DC. The thing I was actually in town for came together kind of late in the game. But Austin, Texas, September 3rd, tickets now available to the general public. You can use the QR code right here, or I'll put a link down the description. We will be working on putting together a fun program for that. Possible events later in September in a couple cities I won't mention by name. Stay tuned for more information, and patrons will get notified first as usual. Something I want you to keep in mind as you're watching this, I shot this whole thing in about a day and a half. So you could say, CityNerd, you really need to spend more than a day and a half in a city like this to do it any kind of justice, and I agree with that. But also, I'm hoping to impress on you just how much cool stuff you can see and do in a very limited time in our nation's capital. So just in the interest of full disclosure, the thing that brought me to DC was a conference for what I guess you could call progressive-minded content creators. It's kind of neither here nor there as far as you, the viewer, are concerned, but just to explain the time constraints I was under. Also, the conference organizers gave us all ride-hail credits for transportation from the airport. DC National is the last US airport I'd ever consider using a ride-hail, which I'll explain why in a second. But a couple days before the event, I went into the conference group chat to try to pitch all the other creators on taking Metro from National Airport to the conference hotel, and I just got crickets. Which I don't fully understand. Like, imagine being a left-leaning influencer and not taking public transit, especially when it's as easy as it is here. Probably just goes to show what a weirdo I am for thinking my opinions are normal, and what weirdos all of you are for watching this channel at all. Okay, I've analyzed this airport connection in other videos, but let's do it for real this time. Flight touches down at 3:54 p.m. We get into the gate pretty quickly, and then if this is a train, I'm out the door in about a minute. But because I'm in row 16, I'm not out into the airport concourse until 4:11. National is not a small airport, but it's not especially large either. Down an escalator, out of security, and then you go up another escalator to get to the metro station. That's 7 minutes from getting off the plane. If you're doing it right, you have the express transit feature set up on your smartwatch already. And I could have taken the blue or yellow line out of National to get to DuPont Circle, but I'm impatient. I just wanted the first train, and a yellow line comes at 4:21. 7 minutes and a few stops later, you're crossing the Potomac into DC. 4:32 p.m., you're at Archives, which is pretty central, but I'm going to Gallery Place, Chinatown to transfer to the Red Line. The transfers are pretty smooth because the stations are well designed and the trains are frequent. So I'm on a red line at 4:38, and a couple stops later, I'm at DuPont Circle Station, 4:43 p.m. Just a little more gauntlet to run because most of the metro stations are pretty deep. It's a long escalator ride, but I'm out of the station at 4:45. That's 24 minutes from the airport metro station, just 34 minutes from stepping off the plane. I think Arthur C. Clarke said, "Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic." Well, this system is 50 years old this year, and it still feels pretty magical. Now, I'm coming from the West Coast, so that's my lens for this, but there's no doubt, if it makes sense to come through Union Station, all the better. Extremely central to the metro network, and it's really about as good as an American train station gets. A bit corporate, but really no more so than train stations overseas are. It's a great piece of architecture, honestly much more dignified than dreary jetways and interminable airport concourses. More than that, though, the back of the station where the platforms are doesn't feel like a US train station at all. It feels more like a proper train shed in Madrid or Paris or London. So I will have to come back and ride an actual intercity train, but what I was really here for was hinted at in the wayfinding. The district's finest transportation mode, the DC streetcar. Follow the signs out the back of the station, through the parking garage, all the way to the H Street overpass that crosses over the train platforms, where the streetcar alignment begins. Says trains run on 12-minute headways, but spoiler alert, the headways are actually infinite because the streetcar ceased all operations on March 31st. You know, I don't really have coherent thoughts about modern urban streetcars. They can be low ridership budget sinkholes, but they can be high ridership development catalysts too. I think the success of the DC streetcar depended on continuing to expand the network to increase utility, and the poor ridership performance of the initial segment just outpaced the city's ability to plan and design and fund extensions. I think there's a lesson in there somewhere. Last thing on H Street, and it's something that's bothered me for years coming to this city, and you'll notice it all over DC if you're a noticer of things. Absurdly long pedestrian countdown intervals that start at the beginning of the walk phase. If you're coming from pretty much any other US city, the countdown starts during the flashing "Don't Walk." This is even specified in the Federal Highway Administration's Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. If used, the display of the number of remaining seconds shall begin only at the beginning of the pedestrian change interval. Countdown displays shall not be used during the walk interval. And I think the reason the MUTCD is insistent on this is that any countdown before the flashing "Don't Walk" is just considered extraneous. Traffic engineers assume a walking speed of 3.5 feet per second as a design parameter. That's how the duration of the flashing "Don't Walk" phase is calculated, and anything in excess is just walk time. Adoption of the full MUTCD is not a requirement though, and I believe DC documented a formal exception in 2008. And I think the rationale is for older people or people with impaired mobility who may only be able to cover 2 or 3 feet per second comfortably. That extra information during the walk phase can be very useful. So my verdict, DC kind of enlightened, and the MUTCD a bit ableist if I'm being honest. Okay, let's bring this thing home. It's probably conspicuous at this point that I've basically gone this entire video without talking about anything on the National Mall or an adjacent downtown DC, which if you think you heard scare quotes when I said that, you heard right. Other than having an absolutely outstanding location of America's only 8-star Michelin restaurant, there's not much to recommend downtown other than like the metro stations themselves. It's ironic because most of what visitors come to the district for is here. Monuments, museums, and institutional uses that are all critically important, but also kind of urbanism killers. DC is amazing, but it's also a city where if you find yourself in the wrong place, you can easily find yourself spiraling into depression and/or an incandescent rage. Some of this is just an artifact of the political times we live in generally, but some of it is the current administration messing in the business of the city. I'm not even talking about interfering with mayoral elections, which is obviously bad. I'm talking about the fight over the 15th Street bike lane, which is a whole saga. It's a two-way protected bike lane constructed in 2021, and it runs north-south along the west side of 15th, right alongside the White House grounds, the Ellipse, through the mall and past the Washington Monument, and all the way down into the tidal basin. The Trump administration's argument is basically the same kind of argument you'd hear in a random Facebook thread or Nextdoor post, which is bike lanes increase traffic congestion, bikes aren't real transportation, streets are for cars. Well, the city DOT actually did before and after studies and found that post-implementation, the two-way bike facility decreased all crashes on 15th by 46% and bicycle injury crashes by 91%. I guess it all comes down to what you trust more, actual data or literally anything this administration tells you. Anyway, I grabbed a bike share and rode 15th, and this is what I saw. You can decide for yourself. So, Washington is the city where decisions get made that impact every American's quality of life. Right now, we have a White House and two congressional chambers that are dominated by basically the same kind of reactionary weirdos you'd find in the comments section of any news article on your average social media platform. Except, these are people who get to vote on whether the funding we send them gets sent back to us in the form of livable streets projects, or transit capital funding, or affordable housing, or any number of other things that help cities function the way they should. I spent some time exploring Capitol Hill, which is just beautiful, walkable, gentle density urbanism. It's also where a lot of our senators and representatives live on our dime when they're doing our business, and the irony is hard to escape. A lot of Congress people live their daily lives in the kind of smart, walkable, mixed-use urbanism that they then turn around and deny to their constituents. A lot of the people who represent us in the federal government claim to dislike any way of doing things that smacks of a European approach. Yet they spend their days enjoying the benefits of the gray urbanism of America's most European city. I mean, they even have their own bespoke subway. It's all just crazy making stuff. So, DC, undoubtedly a giant among the great US cities and with so many unique features, including the fact that this is roughly 700,000 Americans who are represented by 0 senators, despite having a higher population than some states that are represented by 2. And Washingtonians are not even represented in the House in any meaningful way. It's an injustice, and it also gives the people who live here maybe a bit more of a chip on their shoulder, a bit more of a shared identity, and maybe a bit more community. So let's close on the neighborhood of Petworth, where I managed to run into the annual Porch Fest. It's basically what it sounds like. Bands and DJs and rappers playing on front porches all over a single neighborhood. It's not unique to DC, but you don't get much of this on the West Coast for whatever reason, and certainly not to this scale. I mean, this was all happening over just an incredible number of properties. And I kind of wondered as I walked around checking out bands, some of them really, really good actually, how much of the success of something like this depends on the urban form itself. Because the neighborhood is not only densely packed single family, but a lot of times attached single family, occasionally multifamily. There just aren't that many urban neighborhoods in the US where something like this would even work, least of all on the West Coast, maybe outside of parts of San Francisco. So I guess my takeaway is there's no doubt a lot of the absolute worst things that are happening in this country are happening in Washington, D.C. But it doesn't take much effort, or even much more than a day and a half, apparently, to discover that some of the very best things happening in America are happening here too. I've been to DC several times in my adult life, but every single trip has been because of some sort of job-related conference or summit. This apparently even turns out to be true when your job is making videos on the internet. But this trip, I was committed to using what little spare time I had to finally film some DC content. And for this to work at all, I had to be 100% organized, which doesn't come naturally to me, but that's where today's sponsor, Bellroy, comes in. Bellroy is an Australian company that started up in 2010, designing wallets that are slim and efficient and prioritize access to the items you use the most. Since then, they've expanded out the scope of their offerings quite a bit, including bags, luggage, accessories, phone cases, all kinds of useful everyday stuff that stays true to the company's original design philosophy. In terms of organization, there's one particular Bellroy item that I cannot live without on a city visit, and that's the tech kit. If you're like me, when you travel, you've got all kinds of different cords, adapters, earbuds, power banks, mice, and all of it invariably ends up all jumbled up in your backpack or worse, misplaced in a hotel room. The tech kit solves all of this, storing everything in a compact and organized way and giving every accessory its home, even when you're not traveling. So I do recommend Bellroy's products because they're nicely designed and extremely functional, but here's something I like even more. Bellroy is a certified B Corporation. That means they meet high standards for sustainability and social good, including the fact that they've upcycled over 25 million plastic water bottles and hundreds of thousands of pounds of industrial nylon offcuts to make their goods, including the tech kit, which is made from recycled woven fabric. Bellroy also sources BlueSky certified textiles, which meet stringent standards around chemical usage throughout the production process, so the materials in their products don't release harmful chemicals. I've been using Bellroy's stuff for years now because they will always give you a well-designed, high-utility item you can feel good about. Also, when you use my custom link down in the description or the QR code right here on screen, you can get 10% off anything on their site. So go check out their selection and find something you like, or maybe even better, something someone you care about will like. And that's all I've got. Thanks for joining today, and thanks as always to the patrons for your direct support, which helped fund a couple extra days so I could do some filming while I was in DC. Thanks to the Nebula subs too, and thanks so much to the Trending Up folks for bringing me out again. I hope to get back and do it in 27. Keep the great topic suggestions coming. I'll be back with a new episode in a couple weeks, and I'll see you then.